podcast powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL Week 10, we are officially past the midpoint in the pro football season. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, FanDuel.com/bet-the-board. Take advantage of your $1,000 risk-free bets, your 30-1 enhanced odds, all sorts of great new user promotions right there at your fingertips. Also, given the somber nature of this holiday, want to try and say a special thank you to all the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces and everywhere else around the world for some of the great sacrifices you've made that allow us to be able to bring you some of the best gambling content here on this Veterans Day. Mr. Payne, NFL season continues to roll along. We were treated to a surprisingly good and entertaining football game on Monday night between the Bears and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I love when you end with the teams because my memory is just completely shot. Yeah, kind of unfolded as we thought it would with the Bears covering. It was just a really inflated price looking at the number, right? We discussed it Monday night. It was more of like a 5.5 line it should have been, but prime time books are going to balance the action a little bit. Justin Fields looked phenomenal pushing the ball down the field, and that is one element of the Steelers defense. While we think they're very good, obviously, you've lost some guys on the interior of the defensive line. You lost some guys in the secondary coming into the season, and so they can be had down the field a little bit. I just wasn't sure Bill Lazor and those weapons would be the one to exploit the secondary. But I thought the game plan was pretty damn good. And I know everyone's bitching about Nagy, and I get it. He's kind of the easy target now, but this is in Bill Lazor's hands for the most part. And the offense has been substantially better with Bill Lazor calling the shots. There was also some questionable calls, I thought. What we kind of discussed came to fruition. If you saw some of the explosive passes that unfolded in the earlier parts of the game, some of those 3 tight end sets, that was the touchdown in the back of the end zone that called back for the phantom penalty. But a lot of the things we said came to fruition. I was a little surprised with how many points were scored, but there was that battle going on initially early in the week. There was a group that went under 40, and then like thieves in the middle of the night, late Sunday night, early morning, there was a well-respected group that went over 38.5, and that kind of cashed with these.
You know, it's always interesting. We're so trained to be able to look at numbers and realize that every point spread, regardless of sport, tells a story. And when you looked at the game number before things kicked off, we know it was pretty much 7 painted across the board. You watch that first half and go, you know what? This football game is pretty even. I know the scoreboard says Steelers 14-3, but they were gifted 2 short fields and were able to take full advantage. The Bears, of course, had their one drive end because they decided to throw to Jimmy Graham multiple times instead of targeting Cole Kmet. In the red zone, they kicked a field goal. And here comes the second half number with the Steelers -3, creating a number from a math perspective adjusted that essentially made it a 2-touchdown number. It almost scared me off a bit. Sure enough, the Bears are able to get a few momentum plays, keep that game competitive from start to finish. And like you said, no doubt some questionable calls, albeit none that had an impact, on either the spread or total. Tony Correnti, a little flag happy to say the least. I do applaud the hip check, though. It's something that you would have seen out of NHL 95 back in your video game playing days.
You're right. The Bears had actually outgained the Steelers in the first half. And so when I saw that open, I'm like, man, that is just bizarre. I must be missing something here. And to your point, it kind of made me a little nervous betting the Bears at halftime. But yeah, the officiating was terrible. And I think if you're a Bears fan, right, that is probably what determined the outright victory. But from the spread perspective, had no relevance on it.
Nope, that is for sure. Bears fans, plenty of reason to be irate, but at the same time, your silver lining is that you finally saw flashes of brilliance that you kind of mentioned in regards to the face of the franchise in Justin Fields. But on to Sunday's slate. and we have a couple of marquee matchups, none that might be more impactful in the AFC than what will be taking place at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, where the Patriots are a 1.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook as they'll welcome in Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns. Total in this game sits at 45. When you look at the Pats, they've won 6 straight home meetings versus the Browns. The last win for the Browns in Foxborough, well, ironically enough, it came with Bill Belichick as their head coach. Both teams have struggled all season long as far as their red zone efficiency is concerned, ranked in the bottom 10. When you look at the Browns, saw an interesting tweet earlier that they've been hurt the most by penalties this year, losing a net of 3.5 in terms of EPA per game on penalties. Obviously, you want to button that up and be a little bit more disciplined. But Payne, seemingly every week, at least since the last couple of weeks, one team appears ready to go into battle without a couple of marquee players. And in this case, a depleted Cleveland Browns backfield, potentially without Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I think that's probably the good place to start here in the impact that it had on the number. You know, books opened Cleveland +3. That got hit Sunday night. The 2.5s were taken Monday. Got sent down to pick. And those are the guys saying we think Cleveland's better than New England. Cleveland's healthier, right? They're better without OBJ, the whole 9. But candidly, I think Nick Chubb being out expedited the inevitable from the largest bettors, the most influential bettors, and that inevitable was these two teams are power rated dead even, and this can't be a pick in New England when it's Belichick against Baker, and it certainly can't be that with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and Jack Conklin all out. And, you know, I dug into this last night. We don't value, I guess, in general, running backs, and I completely understand it, but there are certain teams that you do have to value them based upon the makeup, and the makeup of this team is we're going to be a run-first team. And if you look, there's 6 games where Chubb's missed in the Stefanski era. Cleveland's averaged 18.8 points in those games. 4 of the 6 games, Cleveland scored 17 or less. 4 of the 6 games, Cleveland's averaged 3.8 yards per rush or less. I know the fantasy guys fell in love with Dearness Johnson after the big performance against Denver, but that's a short week Thursday night game with the Broncos' front 7 just decimated by injury. New England isn't great against the run, but this is certainly a taller task for Johnson. Then you kind of look at the element of Baker against Belichick. That's obviously a tough matchup for Baker. And you start to look at some of the things Cleveland does formationally. They'll use 11 the most of any grouping, so that's 3 wide sets. Patriots defense has been damn good defending passes from 3 wide sets, only an 84 passer rating allowed. You would assume J.C. Jackson removes Jarvis Landry. Jackson's allowed 54% of targets to be caught in a 49 passer rating when targeted. So who do you go to? Is it Donovan Peoples-Jones at this point? You also look at the other formation that Stefanski loves to operate out of, 2 tight end sets, 20% of snaps. New England's allowed a 61 passer rating on throws from that formation. Now, I said it last week. I have a hard time gauging the Browns. I don't think the offense is top 5 like DVOA suggests. There's been moving parts in and out of the lineup virtually every single game with injuries, but I think it's still fair to say this is a step up in class for the Patriots defense. It's played a bottom 5 schedule of offenses. But Cleveland's got to get their ground game going somehow on early downs to have a chance. And I just think Belichick's going to be extremely smart defensively in this game. When Stefanski lines Baker up under center in these heavy sets, Bill is going to blitz the rollout and boot side. Donovan Peoples-Jones becomes one of the largest key factors in this game in my mind because I just think J.C. Jackson removes Landry. If you look at how the Patriots defend tight ends, they've allowed the least receptions and yards to the tight end position in the entire NFL. So, the screen game, the, throwbacks to the tight ends, that's probably going to be fairly well covered. I mean, New England is the best by a wide margin defending tight end. So it basically becomes Baker to DPJ and then sprinkle in Dearness Johnson. It's not necessarily the offensive recipe you had in mind when thinking about the Cleveland Browns offense this year.
No, not at all. And your point talking about Nick Chubb, I mean, some of those numbers that you gave are absolutely staggering in terms of how their offense falls off the table. And to put some of what Nick Chubb's been able to accomplish in his career from a historical perspective, among running backs with 500-plus rushes, Nick Chubb third all-time, which puts him in a class with Bo Jackson and Jamal Charles. So little to say. We can talk about running backs and kind of being a dime a dozen. You saw the Titans obviously exceed expectations from an odds maker perspective last week without Derrick Henry, but there are some of those bell cow backs where the entire scheme is built around them that the dynamic changes completely when those players aren't available. On the other side of the...
Jamal Charles, Hall of Fame or not?
You know what? The one thing for Jamal Charles, and I honestly have to go back and look, I feel like longevity is the one thing that worked against him. But at the same time, for those years that he was out there, he has to be considered one of the most explosive and dynamic backs. And if Terrell Davis is a Hall of Famer, albeit with a Super Bowl on his resume, you think Jamal Charles has to be included in that mix, no?
Over 10,000 yards combined, obviously 7,500 plus rushing, 2,500 plus receiving. So, I mean, over 10,000 yards, yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
it's tough debate. I don't know if he's going to get in. But, yeah, there was a, 1, 2, I'm looking at this now, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a 5-season stretch where he was pretty dominant.
And, I mean, 5 seasons for an NFL running back, I think has to be seriously considered and weighted. It's not the Frank Gore Lifetime Achievement Award, but if you can be a game changer that teams have to scheme for, even for that short a sample size, it felt like Jamal Charles became the prototypical back for the way that things have transitioned over the years to pave the way for the Christian McCaffreys, the Alvin Kamaras, and what have you, that are dynamic as
Frank's just waiting for Adam Gase to get an OC job.
Yeah.
And he's back.
Frank's just waiting for his big payday coming up against Deron Williams. He's going to enter the ring as a big underdog in that Triller fight. I expect you to have some intel for us there.
I have no idea there, but it's sad that that's actually going on.
Oh, on a variety of levels, especially when you look at the career earnings for Deron Williams. You wonder why he's putting himself in the ring against Frank Gore, but different discussion for a different day entirely. When you look at the other side of the ball, Payne, clearly this is a New England Patriots offense. It's starting to take shape with a rookie quarterback in Mac Jones. We can say that he's struggled a little bit in recent weeks, but he still leads rookie quarterbacks for season-long numbers, but just 1 touchdown and 57% completion rate over the last couple of weeks against elite-level defenses. When you look at Jones's Mac in terms of how he's performed under pressure, I mean, this is a guy that's gotten better as he's had more confidence in the Patriots' offensive line. We know that Myles Garrett can pin his ears back and is going to try and come after Mac. When you try and forecast what New England's offense is going to do to put this Cleveland's pass defense, and specifically their pass rush, in a little bit of indecision, is it establishing the ground game with Ramondre Stevenson, or what kind of way do you think Josh McDaniels elects to attack?
The Patriots offense is really meat and potatoes. They want to run the ball. They want to throw with play action off that run. Obviously, the concepts and disguises and the looks off those principles are a little more complex, but at its core, that's what New England wants to be. And so it does come down to that ground game. We've seen Cleveland show very well in that regard, 5th in defensive rush efficiency. And you have 2 key Patriots running backs in Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevens, who you mentioned, both in concussion protocol. We just talked prior to the show. It looks a little bit more likely that Stevenson is up than Harris would be. So we have to monitor that situation. I'll be interested to see what Joe Woods has planned up front defensively, because I doubt he'll call as many stunts in games, because you don't want to get out-schemed against the Patriots' really complex run system. And if that happens, then all of a sudden you have a big back like Stevenson kind of treating the Browns linebackers in secondary like bowling pins. And so it's like, on paper, you wouldn't expect them to have great success running the ball. But I think there's some concepts in there based upon what the Browns do defensively where they can have some success running it a little bit. When Mac Jones does drop back to pass, he's going to face a front that can get after the quarterback, obviously. The Browns are generating the 2nd best pressure rate. They're number 1 in pass rush win rate as well. And I think the big difference is, compared to Carolina last week, is Cleveland doesn't blitz as much to get their pressure. Certainly facing Carolina, though, I think is a nice pretest for Cleveland. Jones was only pressured on 25% of his dropbacks a week ago. The Patriots' offensive line, to your point there at the top, and you kind of hinted at it, is improving. They've started to get healthier. They're kind of figuring out what that rotation's going to look like, so they have been much better. But, the game plan for the Browns defense needs to be less stunts on early downs so they don't get caught with some schemed-up gashers. Get Mac Jones throwing from shotgun in known passing situations. Force the Patriots receiver group to beat your secondary depth, which is damn good. And then pin your ears back and get after Mac Jones. But none of that can happen if the Patriots' ground game's going. Again, on paper, it doesn't really look like that would be the case. The Patriots are going to be able to run all over the Browns, and who knows if they can. But there are some scheme things that I could see unfold that give the Patriots more success on the ground than projections, especially if Harris and Stevenson both clear concussion protocol.
Yeah, I mean, this is a New England team that we thought was going to get better as the year progressed. There were so many new pieces they had to integrate on both the offensive and defensive side. Specifically at the quarterback position, we weren't quite sure how Mac Jones was going to adjust to life at this level. But to this juncture of the season, you can make the case that New England may have as much upside as any team in the AFC. Is it good enough to beat teams like Buffalo, Kansas City, what have you, on their best day? In my opinion, absolutely not. But at the same time, I think the Patriots restoring a little bit of that legacy and giving some optimism to a fan base goes a long, long way. This game should be great to see if the Patriots can finally get back to some of the basics and actually win a home game, something they've really struggled with all season long. One of the biggest surprises, though, Payne, in the AFC this season has been, of course, the Tennessee Titans. And they find themselves a short home favorite at Nissan Stadium, laying 2.5 as they'll welcome in the New Orleans Saints. Total in this game, 44.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And by virtue of their win streak, the Titans are now the number 1 seed in the AFC and own the league's longest winning streak, all despite having a negative net yards per play average of minus 0.3. They do have the easiest remaining schedule of any team in the league. What is fascinating to try and put in historical context, the Titans became just the 4th team in the Super Bowl era to win 4 consecutive games, all as underdogs of 3+ points. The last time we saw it was in 2012 with the Minnesota Vikings. In come the New Orleans Saints, though, and there hasn't been a better head coach in the National Football League winning when odds makers don't expect them to than Sean Payton. We've seen them go 3-0 straight up and against the number this season as an underdog. All of those wins by 9+ points, 11-2 straight up and ATS in this underdog role since the start of 2018. And if you're a bigger fan of sample sizes, the Saints under Sean Payton's leadership, 44-24-2 against the spread when they're catching points. All things that go up must come down, Payne, and we saw the writing on the wall for this Titans offense that couldn't eclipse 200 yards against the Rams, albeit in a win in Sunday Night Football. Will they remain stubborn and continue to establish a ground game behind the likes of Jeremy McNichols, Adrian Peterson, and 4 other guys that carried the rock last weekend against that Rams defensive front?
4 other guys. Who are they? I have no idea.
I don't think Titans fans do either, so I don't feel so bad.
We broke down Tennessee last week. They obviously won the game, but they did it with 192 yards. That doesn't really breed sustainability on offense. I was interested to see what life without Derrick Henry looked like, not just from the output perspective, but if they would morph into more of a passing team. And the opposite happened. They kind of doubled down on the run. 26 runs for 69 yards. I know part of that was game script, but not very good. 1 first down. The Titans were 65%. 65% run on first down with Adrian Peterson and Dante Foreman. Not for me. I mention that because New Orleans, number 1 in defensive rush efficiency, number 2 in early down EPA per rush allowed. The defensive line only got stronger recently when David Onyemata returned after the 6-game suspension. Adrian Peterson's 36, right? He's nearing like 4,500 college and NFL touches at this point. He is months away from the glue factory, probably.
We said that
just
before
not a
with
viable
him.
replacement.
We've said that before with AD, and he continues to look like Lazarus rising from the dead.
He ran really upright. He was not moving people forward, even when in past years, right, when he's obviously doesn't have the burst and the quickness and the agility he once had, but he was always able to move piles forward, and that really wasn't the case against the Rams either. So that was kind of concerning to me. Now, first game, just got called in last week. Maybe that changes a little bit, but he was running really upright. It was bizarre. to me, he's not a viable replacement for Derrick Henry. Nobody is. And candidly, like, Derrick Henry wasn't even efficient running on early downs in this offense either. His first and second down runs were 6.5% below league average in success rate. So what is Adrian Peterson going to do, right? If Derrick Henry wasn't overly successful in that role either. But what you got from those carries was basically a defense that would wear down late, a defense that was forced to respect Henry, and it would open things up in the pass game for Ryan Tannehill off play action. Immediately what I saw Sunday night is linebackers not biting down as hard on run plays. And Tannehill's play action rate was actually 10% higher than his season-long average, but he had a 79 passer rating on those throws. So we had been calling for like, hey, we need more play action from Tannehill. Let's get back to the 2020 version of this offense. It increased 10%, and yet the efficiency dwindled because you had linebackers, again, that weren't really respecting the run. Overall, Tennessee had the lowest completed air yards of Week 9. And it was one of those rare times when you put it in context where Julio Jones practiced all week. A.J. Brown didn't carry an injury designation to start the week. I know he was a DNP on Friday, but that was for some other things, not health related. So you just kind of wonder if Todd Downing's going to open things up more, or if he just says like, hey, our defense is playing great. We've won 4 in a row. We signed Adrian Peterson and Foreman for a reason. And, we got 2 starting O-linemen back at practice this week. This is going to be our offense and we ain't changing. If that's the case, this game is going to stay under. But if the Titans decide to open it up and throw the ball and put McNichols on the field and design matchups for A.J. Brown and Julio Jones to pick on the Saints' third-round corner, Paulson Adebo, then the game can change a little bit. Letting Jenkins go left this Saints secondary a little bit vulnerable opposite Lattimore. The Bradley Roby trade has not gone as planned yet. We'll see. So Paulson Adebo is basically thrown into the fire as a third-round rookie, and he's getting burned a little bit. He's allowed 4 touchdowns on 42 targets, giving up almost 16 yards of reception. And when receivers are catching it on him, he's not tackling very well. 19% missed tackle rate. Julio and Brown are obviously some big dudes. Not shocking, Todd. You know where Adebo went to school?
On the West Coast, and you're going to take shots at an elite academic institution like always around here. Such disparaging remarks for the Harvard of the West.
Doesn't necessarily bode well to be a physical tackler if you play corner in the Pac-12, I guess. But that's what you're looking at here. So it's like early on, you might see the Titans decide to be the Titans, and we're just going to try to establish the ground game. We'll see if that works. But I think if you're looking to, win this game, eventually at some point, you're going to have to open it up a little bit. And you're going to have to attack Adebo. And you're going to have to hopefully design things to get A.J. Brown paired up on that side of the field and away from Marshawn Lattimore. You're going to have to hope that Julio Jones, who's trending a little bit healthier, is going to have to dominate that matchup. So those are really the key here. Obviously, when we're looking at this game, it's come off the 3. Even the open at 3 is quite telling, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about some of the issues that have plagued the Saints. We know how good they are against the run, but the numbers don't lie as far as their susceptibility to big plays. They've allowed 5 completions of 50-plus through the air this season. They're tied for 28th in the league in completions of 25-plus yards against them, tied for 20th. They've given up 32 completions of 20-plus yards, and that's all you read from some of the Saints beat writers last week about how they were completely confused and befuddled in pass coverage, allowing Matt Ryan to throw for 340-plus yards and generate a quarterback rating of 136. Now, on the other side of the ball, Payne, I think the Titans' defense has been a pleasant surprise. I mean, last week against the Rams, they not only score a touchdown themselves, they set up a 2-yard touchdown drive. They've been able to get after opposing quarterbacks, 23 sacks already on the young season. Considering they only generated 19 last year, I'd say it's a step in the right direction. You're getting Jeffrey Simmons, a one-man wrecking crew who accounted for 3 sacks on his own. Harold Landry becoming an unsung star. Him, TJ Watt, and Myles Garrett are kind of in that elite pass rushing class, so to speak, right now. His 18 quarterback hits put him top 5 in the league, and his 35 pressures behind only Myles Garrett. In comes the Saints offense that we know is extremely limited at the receiver position. I mean, their wideouts have have caught fewer balls as a collective group this season than Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill alone. If you're Sean Payton and you're drawing up an offensive game plan, how are you going about attacking this Tennessee defense?
You did call Harold Landry by the right name. You weren't the guy on draft night who called him Honor Landry. So you have that going for you.
I mean, it's a small win right now as I stumble over my words deep into the week. We'll see how many times I have to repeat or correct myself.
It's foggy. I did the same thing. I thought I was going to get a good night's sleep last night, and then I just kind of laid in bed, and then I did the stupid thing and didn't wake up right away and hit the snooze twice, and it's just an absolute fog upstairs this morning. So, when I look at the Saints offense, the Trevor Siemian thing with Sean Payton pulling the strings might not be bad. And you go back and look last week, Simeon's completion percentage, 1% above expectation. Not bad. Only one turnover-worthy throw. When the offensive line kept them clean, 83% adjusted accuracy and a 108 passer rating. Here's the kicker. If you want to know why Sean Payton wants Odell Beckham Jr. like blood, the Saints receivers dropped 11 balls last week. 11 drops. It's unheard of. There's not a lot of talent in the Saints receiver group, and we know Michael Thomas is now out for the season, which we kind of read the tea leaves there coming into the year. I would expect a better effort this week. All signs point to Siemian operating an offense with balance. The Titans, while they have been better defensively, they're still 24th in defensive rush efficiency, 31st in EPA per rush allowed. Ingram is back and running hard. Keep an eye on the Alvin Kamara situation. He's dealing with a knee and ankle issue. Missed practice Wednesday. The Saints did sign a running back off the street. Again, something to keep an eye on there. The fun matchup is in the trenches when the Saints do decide to pass. That O-line is one of the best in football. It's the strength of the offense. They're second in pass block win rate. But the reason, as you kind of outlined at the top there, is Tennessee's defense has been able to survive the injuries in the secondary because the pressure they're generating, especially from the interior. Interior pressure has always been the best pressure because it's direct, right? The quarterback is kind of functioning and all of a sudden it's in his lap. And that has always been the best type of pressure you can get. Simmons and Autry had 15 pressures and 5 sacks Sunday night. If you look on the season, early downs, Titans are generating 32% pressure rate despite blitzing just 15% of the time. So that is a really fun matchup to watch. It's good on good. I would wonder what that could mean for the Titans secondary if the big fellas up front can't generate pressure at the rate they have the last few weeks. The shocking part is, post-Buffalo game, we thought the 2 starting corners for Tennessee would kind of really hamper an already below-average secondary. But that pressure, is why they've survived. Guys stepping up also in the secondary. You've seen some great scheme stuff from Vrabel. The last 3 weeks, you look at this, against Mahomes, Stafford, and a red-hot Carson Wentz, the Titans are 5th in EPA per dropback allowed. It's nuts. And now it looks like your top cover corner, Christian Fulton, could be back this week. He returned to practice on Wednesday. Tennessee also released corner Breon Borders, so all signs point to Christian Fulton playing this week. Still want to keep a close eye on it, but he'd be a huge get back for the Titans secondary, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I didn't see this coming from Tennessee from a defensive standpoint. The massive improvements they've made, this 4-game winning streak, beating some of the heavyweights as far as the AFC and even going across the country, beating the Rams in the face of adversity. Let's see how they go from the role of being the hunter to the hunted with everything in front of them still to play for, including that number 1 overall seed in the AFC, given some of the frailties we've seen from their competition. This will be a great test against a physical defense that's going to try and take away what Tennessee wants to do as far as their DNA is concerned. Do
we think a little more Taysom Hill this week?
I think you have to put more Taysom Hill. I feel, given what he meant as far as the energy to the team last week and just some of the versatility, I want to believe that there's going to be either a full series or a couple of additional packages where you're integrating Taysom Hill into the mix, given what he can bring to the table and try and create a big play.
Yeah, I think, whether you're lining him up at tight end, whether you're putting him at fullback, whether he's in the backfield, 2 quarterbacks on the field at once, there's got to be a little bit more implementation of him just because your weapons are really void of talent. And then I think, if Alvin Kamara isn't able to go or if he's on a limited snap count, You'd probably need Taysom out there a little bit more to create for the offense, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think Mark Ingram is up for a 25-carry workload at this point in his career, but he's been a nice change of pace back, carrying the ball a handful of times and being relatively successful last week, despite a game script that might have necessitated New Orleans abandoning the run when they were playing catch-up against the Atlanta Falcons. To Lambeau Field, and we'll hopefully see two of the best quarterbacks in the game doing battle out there. We know one will be out there, and we'll wait with bated breath until Saturday to see if Aaron Rodgers will join the fray opposite Russell Wilson. You're looking at the Green Bay Packers, a 3.5-point home favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook in this matchup. Total on this game sits at 49.5. And Payne, when you look at this Packers team, 17-2 straight up at home since 2019. It's the best winning percentage in their own building in the National Football League. Meanwhile, the Seahawks, this is a team that's been pretty good coming off into games off of a bye, winning 4 out of 5, although they did lose last year against the Arizona Cardinals. There are also two teams that run the fewest amount of plays in the National Football League. Green Bay so far to date, averaging 61 offensive snaps a contest. Seattle, 55. I know there are a couple of games that created outliers in those particular regards as well. When you begin to look at this Seattle offense that'll now get their leader back in the fold, along with potentially Chris Carson, who is designated to return from IR, this Green Bay Packers defense continues to befuddle me. I wait for the regression. It's a group I didn't think highly of coming into the year, but you wouldn't know it given how well they've played over the last couple of weeks.
Packers defense has been on absolute fire. And, you know, the components, the parts aren't great, but there's a couple guys up front that are playing at peak levels, and you've had some great performances that we've talked about from some of the guys that we didn't expect to play to this level. Now, if they can start getting some of those bodies back, like a Jair Alexander, suddenly you can start to see this defense trend in a really nice direction towards the latter part of the season and potentially during this playoff push. Russell Wilson's back. Quick healer, missed only 3 games. It will be interesting to see how Shane Waldron gets Russ back in and kind of within the offense and get him comfortable and what that looks like early on in the game. This really wasn't an offense that was humming with Russ before he left with the injury by any stretch. You know, like we were talking about offensive struggles for Seattle even with Russ. So I don't know, first game back, if suddenly like things are going to be great, we're just going to pop on a switch, or, you know, Russ identified something he was doing while he was, you know, out. I think it's kind of tough to assume that the offense just starts humming again because it wasn't when he left. I would expect, kind of to your point, the offense will change just a touch. The tempo slowed with Geno. The run rate increased with Geno. It obviously makes complete sense, but let's see what that looks like as well. And it sounds like not just Russ back, but you mentioned Chris Carson trending in the right direction. 2nd-round pick D. Eskridge also has a nice chance to return. That'd be a good compliment to Metcalf and Lockett. There's probably a feeling out process for Russ early. And again, just, you know, things were not going well when he left. When you look at the Packers defensively, 23rd in defensive rush efficiency. So I still would expect a heavy dose of Seattle's run game for sure, especially if Chris Carson's able to go. But if Aaron Rodgers doesn't play, I would expect the run rate to increase even more, with Pete wanting a lower variance game if Jordan Love is under center. And that's really, I think, you know, the main talking point of this is, what does this look like with Aaron Rodgers? What does it look like with Jordan Love? And kind of what's happening within the market right now.
And I think, you know, when you try and figure out where this number opened versus where it's gone, I think it's a great discussion point. We saw Green Bay open as a 5.5-point favorite. Number now, as we said at the top of this breakdown, down to 3.5, even some threes out there. Is it safe to assume, and of course we'll have John Sheeran join us later, so I'm curious to get his perspective as well, that this is professional bettors potentially jumping out in front of it, going, all right, we'll take the best number available and figure out what to do with it later? Or is there something else going on when you try and assess the betting market and the story it's trying to tell us?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Obviously, you have Russell Wilson back, so you're going to up your power rating. They've had 2 weeks to prepare. Green Bay had the Thursday night game against Arizona, and then, you know, another tough one on the road, back-to-back weeks in Kansas City. And so, partly you're spot on. This is a pure number grab because there is a massive dichotomy between Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers. We discussed this last week, and we're like, hey, 7 points is kind of what the market is telling us. Probably more in value when you think about where it went through the 3, 4, 6 and on to the 7. But we kind of watched it unfold. Jordan Love had a 31% passing success rate last week against a below average defense. And so we've kind of seen this movie before where we start low on Aaron Rodgers' value, and then by the second week or the third week, we're up to 10, 10.5, 11 points in value. And so, this was pro bettors getting out ahead and saying, hey, I'm going to grab the 5.5. There's even a couple 6s. We're going to grab those numbers. And if Aaron Rodgers is in, we probably have a coin flip game. But if he is out, this line is going to swing to Seattle minus 2.5, maybe even 3. And now all of a sudden we're sitting great, not just with a massive plus EV ticket on Seattle, but we have the ability to come back if we want to. And what makes this matchup so interesting is where you want to attack Seattle is their secondary, right? They're 24th in defensive pass efficiency. They're a well above average team against the run. So if it is Jordan Love, suddenly you don't have the ability to attack the Seahawks where they're most vulnerable. Ultimately, let's see what happens. The word is Aaron Rodgers will take his test on Saturday. He won't be allowed in the building, so they'll test him from outside. He'll then go back to the car and wait 30 minutes for the test results. Now, this could leak prior, right? If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm probably taking like home tests to see if I have it or if I'm still showing up as a positive there before I go in. So this may start to, his availability may start to leak prior to when it's supposed to. So it'll be interesting to see. The market typically has that information before even guys like Schefter, but we'll see how this plays out. But that's ultimately what's transpired with the large early week movement.
Can only hope that he's available. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of these matchups between the likes of a Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers to look forward to as these guys both get into the latter portions of their career. Let's hope both of them are healthy and ready to put on a show Sunday afternoon from Lambeau Field. Payne, from the Sunday slate, at least the early portion of the day into the mid-afternoon, we have a tremendous game at night right here in my backyard where the Kansas City Chiefs will come in and take on the Las Vegas Raiders. You're looking at Kansas City, a modest 2.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. You do have to lay $1.20 on the favorite. Total in this game sits at 52.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And when you begin to assess these two teams, hey, look, let's get the top line stuff out of the way. Kansas City has done nothing but burn money at the betting window, going 4-16 against the spread their last 20 games overall. They're 3-14 against the number the last 17 games they've played in the regular season. They're 2-7 against the spread so far this season, despite a 5-4 straight up record. What's been interesting, though, is over the last 4 games, they've now played under the total in all 4 of those, and every single one of those unders has cashed by 10+ points. No team has gone under by 10+ points in 5 straight games since the Denver Broncos back in 2016. And while we talk about Sean Payton being outstanding as an underdog, Derek Carr deserves a ton of credit as well. The Raiders have been good in that role this year, 3-1 against the spread, straight up as a dog. Derek Carr, 11-3-1 against the number in his career at home in primetime, and as a home underdog, 9-1-1 playing under the bright lights. No other quarterback has more than 2 outright wins in that span. Derek Carr has 7 to his credit. I think when you're looking at this game, the simple question is there something fundamentally wrong with what's going on for the Kansas City Chiefs offensively?
The first thing is I would expect that trend you mentioned from 2016 to be matched here. The Chiefs are struggling offensively, and it's a totally different kind of struggle the last 3 games. I think that's important to kind of differentiate here. The first 6 games, the Chiefs were lighting the world on fire offensively, regardless of what anyone says. Mahomes was on fire. The Chiefs were number 3 in EPA per play. They were number 1 in EPA per play the first 4 games of the season. They were just crushing it, but they kept turning the ball over. And so logically, we assume turnovers would regress based upon the kind of turnovers they were. I mean, bouncing off helmets into people's hands, through Tyreek Hill's hands, and just a defender just sitting there waiting. And you would think that would regress and everything would fall back into place. The opposite's happened. The last 3 games, the Chiefs have been abysmal, like for real struggling. And you can see it in the underlying metrics, which is something you wouldn't see the first couple weeks. They're 26th in EPA per play, 30th in points per play. The Chiefs' third down magic basically halted over this 3-game stretch. They've gone from first the first 6 games to 19th the last 3 games on third down. And, really what we discussed last week came to fruition. Nothing we said didn't happen in that game, right? The Packers came out. They played their 2 high shell defense, which they play anyways. The Chiefs have seen that look more than any offense in the NFL, and by a long mile. Mahomes struggled. He didn't take what he was given. When he did, he struggled with accuracy. And the few times the deep shot presented itself, Mahomes missed 3. At the same time, I have nicely hinted, whether it's injury or it's age, Travis Kelce is not performing to his normal level, especially against press coverage. That was the case again. So suddenly you don't have this underneath weapon that could be really dominating with all the space in the middle of the field because of the 2 high shell looks that the defenses are giving him. Travis Kelce is averaging 1.15 yards per route run against press this season, worst of his career. Defenses can bracket Tyreek, and the Chiefs do not have a third weapon, and that is why there is a full court press for OBJ. Other element is when defenses play with light boxes, Kansas City has to be able to run the ball. But your running backs are Williams and Gore, well below average NFL running backs. Since Clyde Edwards-Helaire went down with injury, the Chiefs are 19th in EPA per rush without him. So, it's hard to believe that Andy Reid and the Chiefs offense, they're kind of, trying to figure out solutions on the fly. And, you're trying to rectify these issues. And now, you have an opponent in the Raiders that have a well above average defense. And I think it's also important to remember, while the coordinator is different, it was the Raiders' second half game plan in Arrowhead last season, which held the Chiefs offense to a 21% success rate in the second half. Mahomes threw a pick. He was sacked twice as well in that second half. That was the first defense that kind of gave KC this rush 3, rush 4, keep a spy, drop 6 and 7 look. Tampa used film from that second half of the Raiders game last year to install a lot of their concepts in the Super Bowl. Again, different defensive coordinator, but the Raiders are certainly better equipped now than they were back in Week 5, 2020 to play this style too, right? Like the Raiders have the pieces to play that scheme even better with the way Max Crosby and Ngakoue are playing right now. Raiders blitz the least amount of any team in the NFL, 13%. They're 6th in pressure rate. And if you look at early downs, the Raiders' blitz rate decreases to 10%. The pressure rate moves to 37%, number 1 in the NFL. In the Patrick Mahomes era, his left and right tackles have never graded out worse as a duo than this season, right? So that is suddenly that matchup with your left and right tackle versus Crosby and Ngakoue. Yep. And so Kansas City has to be able to run the ball when Crosby and Ngakoue effectively get too far up the field as pass rushers, which happens all the time. If you watch, it's like, hey, we're just going to let these guys just go be who they are. You have to make them pay with the run game. You have to run right at them effectively and hope that the ends crash too far up the field. Let's keep an eye on the Kansas City situation at right tackle. Lucas Niang and Mike Remmers both missed practice Wednesday. Both are really banged up. It would be an effort where one of them were to play. They would be far less than 100%. The interior of the offensive line has been very good for Kansas City, right? Creed Humphrey has been just an absolute home run of a pick for Brett Veach. But it's the tackle situation that's certainly given them some trouble, and that is where the Raiders are strongest.
For all the issues that Kansas City's having on the offensive side to try and regain some of that swagger we've grown accustomed to over the years, quietly their defense is starting to round into form as they're getting healthier on that side of the ball. Frank Clark, Payne looks to be more himself. You talked early in the year about the level of athleticism a guy like Willie Gay could bring to the fold. Once he was able to get back, the trade for Melvin Ingram has allowed Chris Jones to kick inside and maybe fit him a lot better in terms of where he was at his most disruptive over the last couple seasons. You, of course, get Javarius Ward back. Now, there is a potential injury brewing. We're not sure of the status for L'Jarius Sneed going into the game this weekend, something worth keeping tabs on. But this is a Raiders offensive line that's had enough of its own issues in itself to try and rectify and deal with. We saw the passing attack really miss that vertical threat that Henry Ruggs provided. I'm not sure Deshaun Jackson gives that element to them right out of the gates. But when you look at this side of the ball, I mean, Derek Carr, probably the least appreciated starting quarterback in the National Football League. But against this Chiefs defense, maybe the Raiders don't have as commanding an advantage in Week 10 that they would have had if this matchup took place way back in Week 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And, listen, I think this is the 4th straight week we've broken down a Chiefs game in the 6th time this season.
Yeah, I got to see who they play next week. I'm sick and tired of talking about this team. Maybe we can skip out on one of their games. You can keep going. I'm looking. Go ahead.
And we've kind of been preaching, right? Kansas City's defense isn't as bad as people think. It's kind of the easy. Anytime you talk Chiefs football, it could be anybody, right? The guy at the
Damn it! We have to do the Chiefs. We have to do the Chiefs game again next week too. Damn it! Okay, go ahead. Play the Cowboys.
Right? Everyone's like, the Chiefs defense sucks. It's like, it's the crutch. It's the easy thing to kind of talk about. But we thought it would improve. And again, it's not a defense that's built to be elite. When they made their Super Bowl run, it was an above average defense, but it was built to play with leads, and that hasn't happened. And, to start the season, you couldn't have handpicked worse offenses structurally to go against for Kansas City than the Browns and the Ravens, right? You look Jimmy's and Joe's wise, Chris Jones, their best player, missed time. Trevarius Ward, one of their best cover corners, missed time, right? The young kids at linebacker with Bolton and Gay are only going to get better. Frank Clark was dealing with dual hamstring injuries that had him out, I believe, 3 games and kind of playing like a shell of himself. Spags finally figured out Juan Thornhill is substantially better than Daniel Sorensen. And then you went out and got Melvin Ingram, who graded out the best run defender in his first game against the Packers, and that allowed Chris Jones to play inside more where he's best. Certainly, some of this improvement from the Chiefs' defense is opponent-aided, but the last 4 games, the Chiefs are 7th in EPA per rush allowed, 9th in passing success rate allowed. I think, Sunday night's probably the barometer, right, to figuring out how much the Chiefs' defense has actually improved. They gave up 71 points in the 2 matchups against Carr last season. If you can hold the Raiders to 24 or less here, that is a really, really game effort, in my opinion. I would think Colton Miller is able to remove Frank Clark, who, again, is much healthier now. But this kind of Ingram-Chris Jones combination lined up side by side in the left could cause some trouble for Brandon Parker and Alex Leatherwood, who have given up a combined 30 pressure since Week 5. You mentioned Derek Carr. He's not going to be considered in the MVP race, but I think when you think about his performance on the field, how he's adapted and changed his style over the last few seasons, pushing the ball downfield, how he's been the glue that's held this team together throughout multiple off-field issues, he really needs to be considered for MVP this year. I know the scoreboard said they lost to the Giants by 7. Reality is they outgained the Giants by 1.5 yards per play. They were a +9 in net success rate last week. I do believe they miss Henry Ruggs, who was turning into really a complete receiver and not just a deep threat. He could do things, on the screen game. He could hit you over the middle. He was physical after the catch. He could leap and catch balls. He was your bona fide deep threat. And the difference now with Deshaun Jackson there is, yes, he's a deep threat, but he can't play as many snaps as Henry Ruggs, or he's going to be injured in, 3 quarters. The difference now is you kind of have to tell the defense, hey, we might be throwing deep here, because you can't play Deshaun Jackson on every down. You could play Ruggs on every down. And so that's kind of the differentiator here in that type of long speed. Now, obviously, you needed a guy that could stretch the field. Your hope is that this combination of maybe Bryan Edwards and Deshaun can do enough to not have a massive dip from Henry Ruggs. If the Raiders are smart, they up their play action rate in this game. For some reason, Carr is throwing with play action about 8% less this season than last. We know the Chiefs' defense is one of the most sensitive to defending play action. I want to use that more. The key, though, is build the lead, right? So the Chiefs have to play from behind, and then that matchup advantage that we outlined of Crosby and Ngakoue can actually eat even more. But that'll be the key here is the Raiders getting out and building a lead, and that, I think, changes the dynamic of this game a little bit.
Should be one hell of a game. And clearly, if the Chiefs are going to still be the team to beat in the AFC West, this is the contest you have to go on the road and win. You don't want the Raiders to continue believing that they have a legitimate shot to try and assert their dominance within the dynamics of the AFC West. Fun game Sunday night, and we can only hope it replicates what we saw a season ago that was back and forth, a game that Kansas City ultimately won 35-31. In this very same spot. We do have one big game left to go. That, of course, is the Thursday Night Football affair. But before we get there, it's important to introduce another perspective into the fold. He joins us every Thursday here on the Bet the Board podcast. You, of course, can follow John Sheeran on Twitter at JSheeran. That's JSheeran1981. And John, we saw underdogs bite for the second straight week in a row. Hopefully the recreational bettors have a few bucks to rub together as they walk to the window for NFL Week 10.
They better have had it from before last week, Todd, because last week was a bit of a massacre again on our side. So, I think it's been a challenge so far this season overall. 3 weeks there where the bettors managed to get the better of us, but otherwise it's been heavily favoured on our side. You know, the weeks that have gone our way incredibly well, and big digits in terms of hold percentage for the books, and it's been difficult. So like I said, those 3 weeks, hopefully people got a few dollars, have managed to keep a hold of it, and are ready to go again this week.
So what you're telling our loyal listeners is that the casual fan didn't look to put together 3-team parlays built around the Jacksonville Jaguars along with the Tennessee Titans in prime time, and then try to roll it all together with their beloved Atlanta Falcons during the Sunday slate?
That pretty much sums it up, I guess.
It's always interesting because, so many people go, oh, we think we have the league figured out. As you mentioned, you get those weeks in October where favorites come home. So it's all the money line parlays, it's the teasers, and then you get back-to-back weeks where all of us, even the ones that do it for a living, sit there, scratch their head, and try and figure out how the Buffalo Bills muster 6 points in a 9-6 loss to Jacksonville. From the bookmaking side of things, John, when you have some of those outlier results, do you guys go back and feel the need to make changes as far as the pecking order is concerned? Because it appears that the AFC is more wide open than we ever could have imagined coming into the year. Yeah,
we're constantly reviewing our numbers and editing them. Like I said, numerous times to you before, Todd, for us, overreaction is our nemesis. We want to be balanced and take a broad look at it. So when we get results like the Jags beating the Bills and, no touchdown in the game, that's just consigned to the, to the memory bank. It really doesn't impact our decision making moving forward. But like you say, all these results play a key part in futures, and we run our sims after every game and make sure that where we are is where we want to be and take the positions we want to. So more open than anyone would have ever expected, but not too much overreaction on our side based on a couple of results.
Since it gets old picking on Payne every week for the trials and tribulations that Patrick Mahomes has gone through, at least through the first couple of weeks of this season, going back to last year, have you found casual bettors are more inclined to bet against Kansas City, John? Obviously, last week, a little bit of an anomaly with Jordan Love getting the start over Aaron Rodgers. But are you starting to sense some skepticism in the betting market, given that this was a very public team, and imagine you guys felt liability on them on a weekly basis previously?
Yeah, they've always been, since FanDuel has been live in the US, Todd, they've been the absolute nemesis. Like every week, people, pounded the Chiefs. People like how quick strike they are, and despite their, struggles in covering for the last 12 months or so, people didn't really mind betting them, even though they were losing money on them. I think they're an exciting watch. Obviously, they're never dead in a game. We saw for the last two postseasons, huge comebacks from, big scores. I remember the Tennessee game 2 years ago, and that was a really expensive one for us where people were able to get, relatively big numbers on the plus side on the money line when they were down, like I said, a couple of scores or even 3 or 4 scores in certain situations. So, I'm amazed by how, this season the public in general have deserted the Chiefs and moved against them. I think I mentioned it 3 or 4 weeks ago. For the first time ever, we were cheering them on. And it's been a steady flow or stream since, in exactly the same way. People are now pretty reluctant, and I think, despite it looking maybe, an attractive number this week, I'm not sure we'll see a whole lot of public money going on the Chiefs until we see them back to themselves.
Payne, your boys out there in betting country are leaving Kansas City high and dry with their 4-16 against the spread record that we talked about earlier in the show over the last 20. So you may need to pick up the phone, you talk to Patrick Mahomes and get him back on track so he can start landing some of those deep shots.
It looks different the last couple of weeks. That is for sure offensively. John, that's probably a good place to start for Week 10 is Sunday Night Football. I know there's a lot of great games, but that's the one a lot of focus will be on. What are you seeing in that game so far? Because you do open with a short price of Kansas City -2.5 on the road. And the guys that I speak with there's been a little bit of a battle there where the price shows value on the Chiefs, but if you are looking at some of the weighted metrics, suddenly you're saying to yourself, this game might be closer to a pick'em. So how are you handling that in terms of the number you're at right now and potentially how it looks leading up to kickoff?
Yeah, this might be one of our strongest positions this season. We're pretty heavily favoring the Chiefs in this game. Payne, our number makes it closer to 3.5. So we are currently at 2.5, but pretty well juiced towards Kansas City. We'll move, I think, pretty aggressively, monitor what the market is doing. So far, like I touched on earlier, I haven't really seen a flood of money on the game. Right now, it's about 2-1 in favor of the Chiefs on the spread. I did have a look at the sharper customers that we have and narrowed that down, and that is also about 2-1, but for sure not the volume that we've seen previously on the Chiefs. And I think, closer to the game, if we see a lot of public money, I think it could actually be for the Raiders. We'd be keen to try and get to a field goal because, like I said, we show value in this as well. There is some small concerns on the trading floor about Mahomes. He just hasn't looked himself. 166 yards passing last week. It's pretty unusual. We've seen, drives almost that have had that from him before. So pretty incredible the struggles they've had offensively, particularly given how impressive they were, how efficient they were through the first 6 weeks or so. So I'm not sure exactly what's gone wrong, but yeah, we show a lot of value in this number. So we'll be very careful. Like I said, if that money does or doesn't come, we'll keep an eye on the market and move aggressively towards the Chief if the market starts to swing.
Makes complete sense. There's also some other great games Sunday. Browns-Patriots has taken some interesting movement. We saw early in the week there was some love for the Browns at 3 and even 2.5, and then Nick Chubb gets announced out, and we've seen a difference of opinion with some Patriots money coming in at pick, now back to 2.5. What have you guys seen on that game, and maybe what does your book kind of lean in this matchup?
Yeah, we were very, very surprised. Like, obviously, there's the couple of issues that you mentioned for Cleveland, but we made the Browns a 1-point favorite in this game. Market opened with New England about 2.5, I think, and moved to 1.5. And then one of our sharpest customers took New England -1.5. It's really confused us. Nobody on the trading floor made this any bigger than a pick'em. So 2.5 right now. We're kind of confused by this line. I don't know if Mayfield is hurt maybe, or I'll be monitoring this one closely. But like I said, I respect that really sharp player, and he was happy to take -1.5. So maybe he knows more than we do.
Sometimes that can be the case. Another interesting game is Saints and Titans. We've seen this kind of jostle back and forth around the key number, some speculation on Alvin Kamara's health status. What are you guys seeing on this one?
Yeah, this is one where we kind of have a small lean to New Orleans as well. I think we made it 2.5. We want to stay inside the 3 if we can at all. The market is in general, I think from last night, at least when I looked at it, juiced towards New Orleans at 3. But yeah, pretty weird game last week from Tannehill and the Titans, one that I would probably throw out a little bit. So yeah, we'll take a small lean with New Orleans here and try and keep it inside the field goal.
You were in attendance for that game. Did the 192-yard offensive output not have you feeling warm and tingly about Tennessee's offense?
It did not. It was a strange game from start to finish, and it was the end of a long week for me as well, so my attention span maybe wasn't what it might have been.
Not as fast-paced as the Ponies. One other game I want to ask you about is Seattle and Green Bay. We know the situation going on there with Aaron Rodgers. A lot of places opened this 5.5, 6. We're now down to, soft 3.5. What have we seen on Seattle? Do you think that is a real position? Is it simply a number grab with the mindset of a free roll saying, hey, if Aaron Rodgers gets announced in late Saturday night, all things are equal. But if suddenly it is Jordan Love back under center, we have a great position with Seattle plus 5.5.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. For me, it's definitely the latter. Our number is 3.5. We did see some money that we respect at plus 4 even as well. So not just the 5.5 to be in a position where you can net out. Obviously expected to move towards Green Bay when and if Aaron Rodgers is confirmed to play. Obviously, he left a bit of a doubt during the week, but I think everything points to him getting on the field. So like I said, we made it 3.5. It's broadly there. Respect the money that came early in the week and even again at 4. So we'll keep a close eye on it. Not a strong position for us at all, though, in the game.
Makes complete sense. Anything else that has caught your attention in terms of the book having liability or anything sharp?
The Chargers is probably one I would offer. We saw some respected money again at minus 2.5, even heavily juiced towards the Chargers on that. Obviously, there's a COVID spot brewing for Minnesota there. Through 3, obviously. We would probably still just lean Minnesota, just given the way that it's gone through the field goal, and see what happens in terms of the COVID scenario closer to the week. So that's a tough one to watch. That's one that definitely we respect in terms of seeing the money, though. I mentioned Cleveland, and then I think the other one we probably shade is Atlanta. We made that game 8, Dallas by 8, and we'd probably get more aggressive, particularly if we can get it as far as 10. So it sits around 9 now. If it moves another point or so, we'll take a decent position against Dallas in that game and probably have to sit and suffer another Falcons performance.
So
Matt
many
Ryan in the offense is humming right now. Looking good under Arthur Smith.
That may have to do, Payne, more with the explosive pass defense or lack thereof that we talked about earlier in the show that the Saints have struggled with, obviously.
Yes, no doubt about that.
I wasn't sure if you were going to say further nice things on Matt Ryan and talk about him having a career resurrection in the twilight of this Falcons offense with Arthur Smith. But, John, it's always great to get your perspective on things. I know we've hit you with a variety of games, so we know kind of where you guys stand and some of the games that we've broken down from the X's and O's. So wanted to wish you the best of luck this weekend. Payne, I wasn't sure if you had anything else that you wanted to pepper John with before we send him on his merry way.
No, that's everything.
Awesome. You can follow John on Twitter at jsheeran1981. And thanks as always, John. We appreciate your time this week.
No problem. It's always a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
It's always interesting, Payne. We get a chance to pick John's brain a little bit. We obviously come in with some of our preconceived notions. We can read the screen. We talk to a variety of people, both on this side of the counter and that. But to hear him talk about their view on a game that we just broke down in the Kansas City Chiefs and the Las Vegas Raiders, I think echoes a lot of the same sentiments that both you and I had coming into it.
It's a really interesting game. I think there's going to be a little bit of a battle there. And it just depends on how you gauge these two teams, obviously, right? If you're looking at, a full season metrics with some priors, doesn't surprise me that Kansas City is minus 3.5 in terms of how their in-house odd makers view this. If you are looking at weighted metrics over the last month, you can see how other sophisticated bettors feel this game should be pick 'em. And so ultimately, I think what you're going to have is a little bit of a battle here, and it just depends how professional bettors want to hit this game for the opposite side, right? The Raiders. So there is a battle here. The numbers guys are on the Chiefs. I think the larger bettors may gravitate towards the Raiders, but if they do so, maybe it's in a teaser, getting it above the 3 and the 7. But it is interesting to kind of hear the different viewpoints of this game. And again, it just comes down to what is Kansas City offensively? We knew they were humming despite the turnovers early in the season, and we thought those would regress. But what we're seeing offensively the last 3 weeks is a full-blown struggle, and it's across the board. It's Patrick Mahomes' inaccuracies. It's Travis Kelce not being able to beat man coverage at the rate he once was. It's teams bracketing, Tyreek Hill. We haven't found that third weapon, right? It's, is it Byron Pringle? Is it Mecole Hardman? Where's Josh Gordon? we just haven't seen that third weapon, and then there's struggles at the tackle positions as well. So it's not just one thing you can pinpoint. It's across the board for the Chiefs, and you just wonder if they can get that rectified in a week.
It's always the balancing act as not only a bettor but also a bookmaker, when you don't want to overreact to the increased amount of data exposure you have, but you also don't want to underreact. And clearly right now, books feel more than comfortable with the prices they've been hanging on the Kansas City Chiefs, as they've been in a good spot despite KC's futility where it matters most at the betting window. So good to get John's take there. And of course, we'll see that game amongst others unfold on the football field on Sunday. But before we get to Sunday, Payne, we do have a game on Thursday Night Football, and this is the perfect time to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod and go to FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your $1,000 risk-free bets, your enhanced odds, your single-game parlays. So many different wagering options to try and get you into the game as early as this evening. Baltimore Ravens, 7.5-point road favorites against your beloved Miami Dolphins this evening at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on this game sits at 46.5. When you look at the most recent meetings between these two teams, they haven't been pretty by any stretch of the imagination. The Ravens have absolutely housed Miami on multiple occasions, and this will be the first meeting since Lamar Jackson threw for 300-plus yards and 5 touchdowns back week 1 in 2019. When you look at Lamar, 17-4 in his career on the road, the second best road winning percentage of any player with 10 or more starts. Only Jimmy Garoppolo is better over that stretch at 12-2. It is, of course, also a homecoming of sorts for Lamar Jackson, who grew up in the South Florida area. If you're the Miami Dolphins and you're trying to figure out a way to scheme up an offensive or defensive game plan against this Ravens team, how are you trying to go about approaching slowing down Lamar and what the Ravens can do with a healthy receiving core that'll be boosted by the return of Sammy Watkins as well?
Ultimately, it comes down to what Brian Flores decides to do schematically, right? I mean, he runs a defense that has been built to play man and blitz. There's a reason you pay Xavier Howard and Byron Jones the money you do, and you spend draft capital on Javon Holland early in the second round, and he's been fantastic. Over the years, it's been said that you can't play man against mobile quarterbacks. You know, you can't have your secondary turning its back in coverage against mobile quarterbacks. It's pretty much true. The odd part here is this. Lamar has been substantially better throwing the ball against zone than man this year. Large splits. So you kind of just wonder what Flores is going to do. He's playing a little more zone earlier in the year, and then they got back to their man principles, and they've shown well the last 2 weeks. Obviously, the Texans not the stiffest test, but Tyrod was there, and the performance at Buffalo the first 3.5 quarters was fantastic. The Dolphins love to blitz from their man concepts, 36% blitz rate, second highest in the NFL. Lamar has more interceptions than touchdowns against the blitz this year. The Dolphins do have some pieces in the secondary if they want to play with 5 defensive backs, which we've seen works well against this run offense because, you know, you can have more speed on the field. Doesn't allow Lamar to hit the explosives as well. It doesn't allow him to get to the outside as easy. So you can have 5 defensive backs on the field. A guy like Brandon Jones or Rowe can play more of that linebacker role with Baker. Baltimore's offense is you know, tough to figure out right now, right? We know the O-line isn't what it once was. Looks like Patrick Marcowie is out again. The running back room leaves a lot to be desired. But somehow when you look at the metrics, Baltimore's 8th in run block win rate, 2nd in rush efficiency, and 5th in EPA per rush. A lot of that obviously is some unscripted runs from Lamar. But it was interesting to kind of see now that we're, you know, in week 10 that the run game isn't as bad as it appears visually. And obviously it's not as good as it's been in years past, but you know, that's kind of the adaptation defenses have made, and Lamar's grown as a passer to negate some of what's been lost on the ground. This really hasn't been easy for Baltimore if you kind of just look at the entire season, right? Like you look and like, 6-2, you know, 7.5 point favorite this week. Like we're just rolling. But they've kind of battled their way to this mark. It hasn't looked pretty at times. There's issues with this team, and they've played a below average schedule as well. So I'm not quite sure what to make of the Ravens. I can tell you at 6.5, there were some guys that did grab Baltimore in this spot. My number, if it were Tua, certainly doesn't get me to 7.5. So that's the interesting debate here. Is the matchups don't necessarily bode the best for Miami, but we always talk about price as well.
What's interesting, too, when you look at this Ravens team is that they've struggled early on in games. They're averaging just a shade more than 2 points per game in the first quarter, third fewest in the NFL. And it appears it takes Lamar Jackson a little bit to get his bearings as a passer. You wonder if Miami can try and benefit from some of that. But to your point, talking about how it's kind of been Baltimore operating in fits and spurts, at some point, the depleted depth in the backfield and no true game breaker. If I'm an opposing defensive coordinator, I'm going to be honest. I don't really worry that much about Latavius Murray, who's been hurt. I don't worry about Devontae Freeman and Le'Veon Bell being able to take the ball to the house the same way I would with the Gus Bus or J.K. Dobbins. So you think they want to key in on Lamar Jackson on some level. You talked about Tua. All week, the Dolphins have been pretty coy. Do you think it's going to be a game time decision in terms of when we know who Miami will elect to go with under center?
The line says Jacoby Brissett. Otherwise, you're looking at something in the 5.5, 6 range. Obviously, he's got a fracture on his throwing hand. It was swollen, and that's why he could not play on Sunday. My guess is he'll warm up and we'll go from there kind of thing, but you also have to factor in no Devontae Parker, no Will Fuller. It is nice to have Preston Williams back, though. I think this is really the first time, though, I can remember a Baltimore defense struggling this badly, and no one's really talking about it either. It's kind of nutty to me. They're 26th in defensive efficiency, 22nd in EPA per dropback allowed. I don't know if Miami can exploit that, but I think they'd be able to exploit it a little bit more with Tua since he's got a quicker release, gets the ball out a little bit quicker. There's not a ton of talent on Baltimore's defense, as crazy as that sounds. Marlon Humphrey is certainly their elite player on that side of the ball. He's one of the better cover corners. He's lost some confidence the last few weeks. Jimmy Smith looks old. Tavon Young hasn't returned to form, and now Deshaun Elliott is also out. Teams, I think, are starting to realize the way you beat this defense with some of those injuries in the secondary is to spread them out, make guys consistently win one-on-one, and eventually you will have someone that can beat that one-on-one coverage. Make these corners tacklers in open space. Make the defense identify if blitz is coming by spreading it out, because we know Wink Martindale sends blitz at the second highest rate. That's basically what's transpiring over the last couple of weeks is offenses are starting to figure some things out. I'm not sure Miami has all the parts to consistently succeed against that. It's really struggling. It's really maddening, rather, to watch what's unfolding here on offense with Miami. It's just, that's going to be Brian Flores' undoing, really. It's sad to see. He hasn't been able to identify an offensive coordinator. Chris Greer hasn't been able to fix the offensive line. And so that's really the matchup here, I think, to watch is the rebuild up front. To this point, and I know they're young guys, just hasn't worked. If you look individually, the players that have allowed the most pressures on the season in the entire NFL, number one is Jesse Davis, 37 pressures allowed. And then there's two other guys tied with Jesse Davis at 37 pressures allowed. Their names are Austin Jackson and Liam Eichenberg. The problem is all three of those wear Miami Dolphins uniforms. And so whether it's blitz or it's natural pressure on a short week, Miami has to figure out how to get that short up and not let Calais Campbell and Justin Houston and Tyus Bowser and Jason Owe to disrupt this game. The Ravens are 8th as a team in pass rush win rate, so that's truly the matchup here. And so if it is Tua, not only is it a slight upgrade, but it's a slight upgrade based upon him getting the ball out a little bit quicker, has a quicker release, not elongated like Jacoby Brissett. So if your problems up front are pressure, I think Tua is a little better suited to go against that.
An interesting game for a Dolphins team trying to gain a little bit of traction as they go into the back half of their schedule. A team that I don't think many really believe would be 2-7 through their first 9 games, kind of picking up the rear in the AFC against a Ravens team who you highlight. Schedule looks favorable. I know what some of the predictor indexes suggest that this is the team to beat in the AFC North, and maybe rightfully so. But at the same time, they look anything but a flawed unit going into the latter portion of their schedule. 5 games broken down as best as we know how to do around these fine parts. Should be a tremendous Sunday slate, as we'll see a little bit of separation potentially in the AFC between the Browns and Pats. We'll get an idea how the Titans handle some prosperity, and more importantly, a showdown of 2 of the game's best. We can only hope that we get Russell Wilson against Aaron Rodgers. Before we get out of Dodge and bid our listeners a fond farewell until we visit them tomorrow on our Bet the Board YouTube pregame show, which we encourage people to go to youtube.com, search Bet the Board, subscribe, comment, and get involved there. Another way that we can add a little bit of content and clarity, hopefully, to your betting process. Where have you identified, my friend, an investable opportunity for Week 10 in the National Football League?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's go with another first half under. We'll go to rotation number 250, Saints-Titans, first half under 22. The hope here is, and obviously we've broken this game down, that neither of these offenses attempt to act like chameleons. We have seen a very run-heavy approach for the Saints early on in their games. We saw it last week, right? 14 runs in the first half, 11 passes. The Titans went out and signed Adrian Peterson and Foreman. All signs point to them wanting to be a power run team. I don't know if that changes, right? Like, I think we know the way to attack the Saints, but is Tennessee going to do that from the onset? No, they'll probably run a little bit early on and figure out they can't do it and then adapt. But that probably is the mindset. That's who they are. It's who they want to be. It's who they told you they wanted to be when they signed the guys they did off the waiver wire a week ago. And then you look across and your opponent's got a backup quarterback. So I would think a little low variance early on in this game. So that's the way I want to attack that. When you look at pace, you have first half pace teams where the Saints are bottom 5, the Titans bottom 3rd of the NFL in first half pace. So this has all the makings of an under. The way it doesn't is late, right? If we get the Saints chucking, similar to what they were doing last week, or Tennessee realizes that they want to open things up because that's the more successful way. But I think we'll do enough in the first 30 minutes to get this under the 22. Obviously, there are some injury question marks as well. Let's see if Taylor Lewan plays. Let's see if Alvin Kamara goes. Teron Armstead is battling a knee injury as well. So couple key cogs battling some injuries for both offenses.
Get that clock going early and often. Sean Payton, Mike Vrabel, get back to your roots, run the football, get into the half 3-0, allow us to cash our ticket inside of 70 minutes in real time Sunday afternoon from Nashville. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as we bid all of you, our loyal listeners, a fond farewell on this Veterans Day, again, want to say that we honor the brave men and women who served to sacrifice so much to protect our country. There's no way for us to ever repay our debts and show our true gratitude. With a first half under ticket in hand for the Titans and Saints come Sunday afternoon, hopefully we'll see you at the window.